everyone. We are going to be looking at the parable of the 10 virgins, or bridesmaids, whatever your Bible says, and the parable of the talents. And so we've got a lot to unpack this morning, and I don't want to be late, so we're going to crack on. I don't know what your attitude is like to timekeeping, but my wonderful husband, Josh, hates being late. Anyone else in here hate being late? I got a confession then. I'm really sorry, Dana, for being late for you 2 weeks ago. I, on the other hand, it's all right, I'll use this one. Thank you. I, on the other hand, am one of those people who dawdles and then suddenly becomes a whirlwind of stress and panic. And it makes for a very eventful marriage. So the other week, Josh and I were going to an event, and he was very clear about the time that we were supposed to leave. Bethan, we need to leave at, and I was just faffing around and running around, convinced we were late. We finally get in the car, and I'm thinking, oh no, I'm 20 minutes late. He's going to be so annoyed, and I'm avoiding eye contact. Anyone else in the room also doing this? And then when I look over, he is strangely calm. And I'm thinking, what is going on? And then I realise he's done it again. He's applied what he calls the Bethan buffer. And for the last 10 years of our marriage, he has added an extra 30 minutes to any meal, meeting or event we're going to. So while I'm in the car apologising, anxious and stressed, we are actually, in fact, 10 minutes early. Part of me is deeply annoyed, another part is deeply relieved. Top marriage tip, Aaron, especially for Claire. She's not here, so I can say it. But here's the thing. Josh can build a buffer for when we're going out, but he can't build a buffer for my spiritual life. He can't make me ready for God, and he can't use my gifts either. Because readiness in the kingdom isn't just about being spiritually awake. It's about being prepared to bring in God's kingdom with the gifts, opportunities, and influence he's placed in your hands. And so before we read these parables in Matthew 25, it's really important to see where Jesus places them. So in Matthew 24, he has been talking about the coming of the Son of Man and the breaking in of God's kingdom, the day when everything will be set right, where evil will not have the final word, and where God's reign will be visible. And the disciples ask, like I'm sure many of us ask today, right? Lord, when will these things happen? What is the sign of your coming? And Jesus' answer is, it's not a timeline. It's not a date. So these parables aren't random moral lessons. They're Jesus' practical, everyday teaching on how to live in light of God's coming kingdom, how to be ready, responsible, and responsive to his invitation. So first of all, let's look at the parable of the 10 virgins. And I'm going to read from 1 to 13. At the time, the kingdom of heaven will be like 10 virgins who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish and 5 were wise. The foolish ones took their lamps, but did not take any oil with them. The wise, however, took oil in jars along with their lamps. The bridegroom was a long time in coming, and they all became drowsy and fell asleep. At midnight, the cry rang out, "Here's the bridegroom, come and meet him." Then all the virgins woke up and trimmed their lamps. The foolish ones said to the wise, "Oh, give us some of your oil. Our lamps are going out." "No," they replied, "there may not be enough for both us and you. Instead, go out to those who sell oil and buy some for yourself." But while they were on their way to buy oil, the bridegroom arrived. The virgins who were ready went in with him to the wedding banquet, and the door was shut. Later the others also came. "Sir, sir," they said, "open the door for us." But he replied, "I tell you the truth, I do not know you. Therefore keep watch, because you do not know the day or the hour. And in first century Jewish culture, weddings didn't look like ours do today. The groom would leave his house, often at night, sometimes on a donkey, sometimes with musicians, sometimes with a whole procession to collect his bride. And the bride's friends would wait with lamps, ready to join in the joyful parade back to the groom's home for the wedding feast. And so this wasn't a private event, it was communal. It was a celebration, a place of belonging. And in an honor-shame culture, being ready was everything. Jesus isn't using random imagery here. He is saying this is what the kingdom of heaven is going to be like, a joyful procession that you don't want to miss. And readiness in the kingdom isn't about frantic activity. It's a life attuned with God's coming kingdom. And in the Amplified Bible translation in verse 3, it emphasizes that the wise virgins brought extra oil. They made space, as we've just sang. They made room. They prepared for the delay. But the foolish assumed everything was going to happen on their timeline. But here's the point. The extra isn't about striving or trying harder. It's not about exhausting ourselves. And in this season of Lent, we think of Jesus in the desert for 40 days, fasting and praying before his ministry. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was listening. He was receiving. And he was talking with his Father. And so the question isn't, how can I try harder? The question is, where am I making space to receive so I actually have something to give? Because if all we do is strive, we burn out. But if we prepare the way Jesus prepared, with quiet solitude, with prayer, with margin, our lamps stay full. So extra oil isn't about extra effort, it's about extra intimacy. And maybe for you that's 10 minutes before your children wake up. Maybe it's reading a psalm. Maybe it's turning the radio off and saying, God, I am listening. Equally, some of us think that we're ready because we're connected to someone who knows God. But Jesus is saying this morning that you need your own oil. And in verse 8, it says that foolish virgins try to borrow oil. But you can't borrow readiness. You can't borrow relationship. You can't borrow faith. And last time I preached, I shared my nan's testimony of how she came to know Jesus. And in January, she went to be with the Lord. So these parables on being ready for the invitation to live for heaven has been on the forefront of my mind since she's gone to be with him there. And for years, I leaned so heavily on my nan's faith. She was a well of wisdom, always ready with a story, a scripture. She carried me in prayer long before I learnt to carry myself. If I was struggling, I'd ring her. If I needed direction, I'd ring her. But here's what I eventually realized. Nan could pray for me, but she couldn't pray instead of me. She could send me her Bible verses, but she couldn't live my relationship with Jesus. She could share her oil, but she couldn't fill my lamp. And at some point, I had to stop living off her faith and going to the source myself. Not because her faith wasn't strong, it was, but because God wanted me, which is so strange, right? Some of us think that. But he wanted my voice, my prayers, my trust, my partnership. And Jesus is saying the same here. You can't borrow someone else's oil, not your parents, not your friends, not your favorite speakers. Borrowed faith can bless you, but it can't save you. And then what happens? The bridegroom arrives, and those who are ready go in, and those who aren't, the door is shut. What is Jesus saying here? Don't assume you will have more time. Don't assume you're going to sort it out later. Don't assume you can borrow someone else's oil. Don't be late for the invitation of your life. If Josh hadn't built that buffer, I would have missed the event. But if we don't build spiritual readiness into our lives, we miss the moment God has prepared for us. The moment to know him, to walk with him, to step into the gifts he's entrusted us. And the closed door in this parable isn't about cruelty. It's about the tragedy of a missed relationship. Because Jesus isn't trying to scare us. He's trying to wake us. Are we awake? Are we still here? Great. Yay. Life is full of deadlines, but this is the biggest one of all. And Jesus wants us ready, not panicked, expectant, not exhausted. So that was point 1, ready. Moving into point 2 now, responsible. So readiness leads naturally into responsibility, because once you're awake to God's kingdom, the next question is, what do we do with what God has placed in our hands? So we're going to look now at the parable of the talents. So if you want to turn to verse 14 to 13, I'm going to summarize it for us. So Jesus tells a story about a master who goes on a journey, and he entrusts his servants with different amounts of money. 5 talents, 2 talents, and 1 talent, each according to their ability. And just to say that when Jesus talks about talents, he's not talking about skills and abilities the way we would use those words today. A talent in the ancient world was a huge sum of money. Some theologians say that it was around 20 years' wages. So the master isn't giving pocket change here. He's entrusting each servant with something incredibly valuable. And Paul echoes this in Ephesians 4 and Romans 12. He says every single one of us, that's me and you today, we are all entrusted with something. Whether that's prophesying, serving, teaching, encouraging, giving, leading, showing mercy, every day, ordinary, beautiful gifts that build up the church. And back to the parable. So the first 2 servants, what they were given, they had 5 talents and 2 talents, and they put it straight to work. They invested it, they stewarded it, and by the time the master returns, they've doubled what they were given. And the master comes and celebrates with them. Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share in the master's happiness. But the 3rd servant does something very different. He takes his 1 talent, digs a hole, and buries it. And when the master returns, he hands it back untouched. His excuse? Fear. He says, "Master, I knew you to be a harsh and demanding man." Ouch. Reaping where you did not sow and gathering where you did not scatter. So I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. See, you have what is your own. And his master's reply, "You wicked and lazy servant." Had to get a bit of Welsh in there. The master isn't angry because the servant produced less. He's grieved because the servant did nothing with what he was given, what he was entrusted. He let the wrong view of the master stop him from stepping into partnership. Fear froze him. A distorted view of the master shaped his whole response. And yeah, maybe comparison did play a part. The others had more, he had less. He probably thought, what's the point? Mine's not impressive. Mine's not going to make much difference. But as Faye spoke a few weeks ago, comparison will always make you bury what God has entrusted to you. And it reminds me of the boy who brought to Jesus his 5 loaves and 2 fish. It wasn't much, but it was his. And when he placed it in Jesus' hands, it became more than enough. And it makes me wonder, what are our talents? What are the loaves and fishes that we have in our lives, but we're discounting because we don't think they're big enough for God to use? Because Jesus says, whoever is faithful with a little has been entrusted with much. Maybe it's a prayer you could pray. Maybe it's a picture of Jesus you could put on your office wall. Maybe it's the encouragement you could give, the generosity that feels small but could be huge to somebody else. And isn't that the goal of our lives? That when we reach the end of our days, we would hear these words that our Master speaks: well done, good and faithful servant. Notice he doesn't say, well done, good and fruitful servant. God isn't measuring your output. He's looking at your obedience. Because what you believe about God will always shape how you live for him. If you believe God is disappointed, you're less likely to tell someone about Jesus. If you believe God is distant, you might stop praying. If you believe God is comparing you to others, you'll shrink back. And this pattern of fear and hiding isn't new. It goes all the way back to the Garden of Eden. Before the fall, Adam and Eve had perfect intimacy with the Father, fully known, fully loved, fully secure, no hiding, no shame. Let's just take that in for a moment. How wonderful it would have been. But then another voice entered the garden, a voice that whispered, "Did God really say?" A voice that questioned God's goodness. And when Adam and Eve listened to that voice, what did they do? They hid. They withdrew. They stepped back from partnership. They buried what God had entrusted them. And that's exactly what the third servant does. He listens to the wrong voice. He believes the lie about his master, and that lie leads him to bury his calling. But the more we align ourselves to God's character, to his voice, the more you step out. As we've sang this morning, he is our way maker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. And if you believe that he's good and generous, you'll step out. You'll invest. You'll participate in his kingdom. But the lie from the devil, the enemy, always blurs our calling. God's voice always clarifies it. The enemy whispers, "Did God really say to speak to that colleague at work? Did God really say that you should use that money and give it away? Did God really say to pray for that person you know is sick?" But God says, "I've entrusted you." The enemy says, "Hide it." But God says, "Use it with me." And so in both of these parables, we see God's character revealed. He is good. He's a bridegroom that wants you to feast. He is generous. He's a father that has entrusted you with real responsibility, and he is inviting. He's not going to force you. Which brings us on to our last point, responding. Both parables are about a response. Responding to God's invitation isn't about perfection, it's about timing. It's about recognizing the moment God places in front of you and choosing to step into it. And sometimes the thing that stops us responding isn't rebellion, it's hesitation. It's that quiet belief that we can always come back to it later. And it reminds me of something that happened to me on Vinted. Anyone here love a bit of Vinted? Yeah. And for those of you who don't know, Vinted is basically an online charity shop where you can search for anything you want. Marvellous, whoever invented that. So I'd found the perfect item. I bought it and it was waiting for me to collect. And I kept getting notifications on my phone saying, your parcel's ready, come and collect it. But I thought, oh, it's okay, I'll go tomorrow. I'll do it later, it'll still be there. And then the message came. Oh, you know what's coming? Your item is being returned to seller. Oh, my heart sank. I'd missed it. Not because it wasn't meant for me, but because I didn't respond in time. And I think that's exactly what Jesus is getting at in these parables. That the kingdom isn't something you browse. It's not something you come back to when you want to look at it later. It's an invitation, a real one, and it has a moment attached to it. The foolish virgins missed the moment because they weren't ready. The third servant missed the moment because he buried what God had given him. And sometimes we don't step into what God is offering, not because the invitation isn't there, but because we hesitate, we overthink, we wait for the perfect moment that never comes, the opportunity that's right there in front of us, but we don't move. But here's the beauty of God's heart. He doesn't just use our strengths, he uses our pain, our brokenness, the very areas of our lives that we thought disqualified us. Some of the greatest kingdom work comes from a place where we have been wounded, stretched, disappointed, or brought to our knees. And when we respond to God from our brokenness, not in spite of it, something powerful happens. Our scars become someone else's healing. And our testimony becomes somebody else's courage. So respond now, because God can use your broken places more powerfully than you can ever imagine. Don't let the thing God is offering you slip back into the seller's hands. Do you like that? Thanks. Because you hesitated. Don't miss the joy, the calling, the partnership, the purpose he is placing right in front of you. And so today, Jesus is inviting you to be ready. He wants you close. To be responsible because he's entrusted you with something real. And responsive because his invitation is for this moment, not someday. So I'm going to invite the band up now. And whilst I was preparing for today, I just felt that there might be some of you here who have that distorted view of God, maybe because of your circumstances, maybe it was because of the way you were brought up, but you need to believe this morning that God is here and he wants to give you a fresh revelation of his goodness. Maybe God has placed something on your heart, but you've been waiting for the right time. Waiting for your finances to be sorted, waiting for the perfect conditions. And if you know that's you, that you've been burying something, he wants to give it to you afresh this morning. Maybe you just feel empty, tired, stretched, running on fumes. Maybe you need your lamp filled again. God is saying, come back to the source. Let me fill you with my spirit. So why don't we stand?